Winter, 1883. Silver Creek, Montana Territory, 40 miles south of the Canadian border, where January temperatures could drop to 40 below and stay there for weeks. The most respected builder in 3 counties stood outside a half-finished cabin, shaking his head. "That contraption," he said, pointing at the stone platform rising inside, "will smoke them out by October, burn the place down by November, or collapse and crush them by December." Inside, a Chinese railroad worker named Chun Wei kept laying stones, methodical and silent, building something the town had never seen, something they called dangerous, wasteful, a joke that would end in tragedy. They were wrong. By spring, Chin's family would burn less than half the firewood their neighbors did. By the following winter, 17 cabins would copy his design, and the master builder who mocked him would publicly admit he'd been ignorant about heat, about stone, about physics itself. Today, you're going to understand why the worst idea became the most copied heating system in Montana Territory, and why modern engineers are now rediscovering what Chin knew in 1883. If you want to learn one real frontier technique every week that worked when survival actually depended on it, techniques modern science is only now validating. Hit subscribe, because what you're about to see isn't folklore. It's thermal engineering that kept families alive when American experts said it couldn't work. Now drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know what winter means where you live. Chun Wei wasn't trying to prove anything. He was trying to survive. He'd come to Montana Territory in 1882 with the Northern Pacific Railroad, one of 800 Chinese workers laying track through mountains that killed men every month. When the line reached Silver Creek and winter shut down construction, most workers returned to San Francisco or headed south. Chun stayed. He'd saved $43, bought a land claim for $12, and planned a homestead. The cabin he built that first autumn followed the standard Montana pattern. Logs chinked with clay and moss, stone fireplace on the north wall, sleeping area opposite. 16 by 20 feet. Practical. Proven. Exactly like every other cabin within 50 miles. It nearly killed his family. The problem wasn't the construction. The problem was physics that nobody in Silver Creek understood, or maybe they understood it, but had simply accepted it as the price of frontier life. Every night, Chin's wife Jean and their 2 children, May, 7, and young Bo, 4, would huddle close to the fireplace while he fed split pine and Douglas fir into the flames. The area within 6 feet of the hearth might reach 75, even 80 degrees. Comfortable enough for light clothing. But 8 feet away, near the sleeping pallets, the temperature dropped to 50. By midnight, 40. And when the fire burned down to coals around 3 or 4 in the morning, the whole cabin would plunge toward freezing. Every morning, ice formed on the water bucket. Every morning, the children woke shivering, their breath visible in the gray dawn light. Jean developed a cough that rattled in her chest. Little Bo's fingers turned white at the tips. Early frostbite, even indoors. Chin burned through 8 cords of wood that first winter. 8 cords he'd cut, split, and stacked himself. His neighbors said that was normal. Some burned 10 or 12. That's just how it is, they told him. Fire dies, cabin freezes. You keep the fire going, or you freeze. Simple as that. But Chun remembered different physics. He remembered winters in Shandong province, where his family's brick kang, a heated sleeping platform, kept them warm all night with a single evening fire. He remembered the way stone held heat, the way exhaust gases could be channeled through mass instead of straight up a chimney and wasted into the sky. He started sketching in the dirt outside his cabin. Calculations, angles, thermal pathways. Jean watched him one February afternoon, her arms wrapped around herself against the wind. "You're thinking about the kang," she said. "I'm thinking we can't survive another winter like this," Chun replied. "Not with what we're burning. Not with how the children sleep. The neighbors will think you're crazy. The neighbors already think I'm different. What's one more reason?" By April, when the ground thawed, Chun had made his decision. He would rebuild the cabin's entire heating system around a principle Silver Creek had never seen. He would route the firebox exhaust through a massive stone sleeping platform before it reached the chimney. The platform would absorb the heat, store it in thermal mass, and radiate it for 8 to 12 hours after the fire died. His family would sleep on top of the heat source itself. When he explained the plan to Samuel Hutchins, the master mason who'd built chimneys and fireplaces for half the homesteads in the county, the older man actually laughed. "Son," Hutchins said, "I've been working stone for 23 years. What you're describing is a death trap." Chun started construction in May, when the last snow melted and the creek ran high with runoff. He worked alone mostly, though Jean helped haul stones from the creek bed and Bo, too young to understand but old enough to carry, fetch tools and clay. The design was deceptively simple in concept, brutally difficult in execution. Instead of building a standard fireplace where heat rose straight up the chimney, Chun constructed a firebox on the cabin's north wall, low to the ground, almost flush with the floor. The firebox itself was compact, maybe 18 inches wide and 14 deep, lined with firebrick he'd traded 2 weeks of labor to acquire. But here's where it diverged from everything Silver Creek knew. The exhaust from that firebox didn't rise straight up. Instead, it flowed horizontally into a channel, a serpentine flue pathway built into and beneath a raised sleeping platform that dominated nearly a third of the cabin's interior space. The platform stood 22 inches off the floor. Beneath it and running through its core, Chun constructed a maze of clay and stone passages that forced the hot exhaust gases to travel nearly 15 feet before finally rising into a chimney on the opposite wall. 15 feet of stone and clay absorbing heat. The platform's sleeping surface measured roughly 8 feet by 10, large enough for the entire family. Chun built it from river stones, each one fitted and mortared with a clay mixture he'd formulated himself, testing different ratios of local clay, sand, and water until he found one that wouldn't crack under thermal stress. The bottom layer was coarse river rock for drainage and air circulation. The middle layer was densely packed stone for thermal mass. The top layer was smooth, flat stones mortared tight, then finished with a half-inch clay cap that would be covered with blankets and bedding. Between the internal flue passages and the sleeping surface above, Chun installed a 6-inch barrier of clay and smaller stones. Enough insulation that the surface would be warm, not burning. Comfortable, not dangerous. The whole structure probably weighed 850 pounds. Maybe more. To Silver Creek, it looked like madness. Samuel Hutchins came by 3 weeks into construction, stood in the doorway, and delivered his verdict loud enough for neighbors to hear. "You're putting your family's bed over an active firebox. Do you understand what you're doing?" "I'm using thermal mass to store and radiate heat," Chun replied, not looking up from his mortar work. "You're trapping moisture. That clay will crack in the freeze-thaw cycle. The whole thing will collapse, or smoke will back up and suffocate you, or worse. You'll fall asleep, and that platform will overheat and cook you alive." "The clay is formulated for temperature fluctuation," Chun said. "The flue pathway has 3 clean-out access points. The draft calculations account for the extended horizontal run, and the surface temperature will stabilize around 95 to 100 degrees, warm enough for comfort, not remotely dangerous." Hutchins stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost paternal. "Son, I'm trying to help you. I've built 200 chimneys in Montana. I know how heat works. You're wasting material, wasting time, and building something that violates every principle of safe construction. A proper fireplace puts heat into the room and smoke up the chimney. What you're doing is backwards. A proper fireplace," Chin said quietly, "wastes 70% of its heat up that chimney. I'm capturing it. You're risking your children's lives." Chin set down his trowel and met the older man's eyes. "I'm trying to keep them alive." Word spread fast. By June, half the town had an opinion about the Chinese stove, most of them bad. "Fire belongs in a firebox, not under a bed," said Margaret Connolly, who ran the general store. "That's not how we do things here," said Robert Finch, who'd homesteaded Silver Creek since '76. Even other Chinese workers expressed doubt. Wang Pei, who'd worked the same railroad crew as Chun, stopped by one afternoon and spoke in Cantonese. "Brother, the Kang works in Manchuria where they have different clay, different stone. This is Montana. Different earth, different rules." Chun just kept building. He installed ventilation channels along the platform's edges. narrow gaps that allowed air circulation and prevented moisture buildup. He built a small clean-out door at each turn in the flue pathway, so ash and creosote could be removed seasonally. He calculated the chimney height to ensure proper draft despite the extended horizontal run, adding 3 feet to the standard design. Every technical objection, he answered with engineering. Every social criticism, he ignored. By late August, the platform was complete. Solid. Immovable. The firebox was ready, the chimney drawing properly, the whole system waiting for cold weather to prove itself or fail catastrophically. The town waited too, some with concern, most with skepticism, a few with barely concealed schadenfreude. It won't work became the general consensus. And when it doesn't, Samuel Hutchins told anyone who'd listen, I hope that family survives their experiment. The criticism wasn't just technical. It was personal. It was cultural. And it landed with the weight of absolute certainty from men who'd survived Montana winters and believed they knew the only way to do it. Samuel Hutchins made his most public statement in late September, during Sunday gathering at the Silver Creek Community Hall, a rough timber structure that served as church, meeting house, and social center for the scattered homesteads. Hutchins stood near the pot-belly stove that heated the room, respected and respectful, a man whose opinion carried the authority of 2 decades building in harsh country. When the conversation turned to winter preparations, he brought up Chin's platform unprompted. I need to say something, Hutchins began, his voice steady and serious, about that heated bed being built over on the way claim. The room quieted. 20, maybe 25 people present. I've tried talking to the man privately. I've explained the dangers. He won't listen, so I'm saying this publicly in case somebody else is thinking about copying that design. Don't. He ticked off the problems on his fingers. First, fire risk. He's built a bed directly over and around an active firebox. One crack in that clay barrier, one structural failure, and that whole platform becomes an oven with a family sleeping on top of it. Second, structural integrity. He's got 8, maybe 900 pounds of stone and clay suspended on a log frame. Clay cracks in freeze-thaw cycles. Everybody here knows that. First hard freeze, that mortar will fracture. By midwinter, the whole thing could collapse. Third, smoke and draft. He's forcing exhaust to travel horizontally for 15 feet before it rises. That violates basic chimney science. Cold air sinks, hot air rises. You don't ask hot air to run sideways through stone. It'll back up, fill the cabin with smoke, maybe kill them with coal gas while they sleep. Fourth, efficiency. He's using 3 times the stone and 4 times the labor of a proper fireplace. Even if it works, which it won't, it's a waste of resources and time. Hutchins paused, looked around the room. I'm not saying this out of meanness. I'm saying it because when that system fails, and it will fail, there are children in that cabin. I've seen what happens when people ignore proven methods in favor of foreign ideas that don't account for our climate, our materials, our reality. Margaret Connolly spoke up from the women's side of the room. Has anyone actually asked him why he's doing it this way? I have, Hutchins replied. He talks about thermal mass and radiant heat and heat storage like he's invented some new physics. But stone doesn't hold heat the way he thinks it does. Not in real Montana winter. Not at 30, 40 below. All that mass will just make the cabin harder to warm up in the morning. Robert Finch, grizzled and practical, added his voice. A real man doesn't need to sleep on heated rocks. You build a good fire, you wake up when it dies, you build another fire. That's how it's done. That's how we've all survived out here. Chinese methods for Chinese winters, someone muttered from the back. That became the refrain. This isn't Canton. This is cattle country. The judgment extended beyond the technical. It became a referendum on belonging, on masculinity, on the right way to face hardship. Young Daniel Pritchard, barely 20 and proud of his new cabin, said it plainest. My father homesteaded in Wyoming in the 60s. He survived winters that would kill most men today, and he did it with a fire and grit. He didn't hide under heated stones like some kind of, I don't know what. A man faces winter. He doesn't run from it. Even the few voices of caution were dismissive. Maybe it works where he's from, offered Alice Brennan. trying to be diplomatic. But we don't have whatever special clay or stone they use in China. Our materials are different. Our cold is different. You can't just transplant techniques across the world and expect them to work. The consensus was nearly universal. Chun Wei was building something dangerous, wasteful, and doomed to fail. The only question was whether it would fail quietly or catastrophically. Wang Pei visited Chen one October afternoon, speaking Cantonese while Jean served tea. "Brother, even I think you're being stubborn. The kang works in Shandong because of the Yellow River clay and the Lus Plateau stone. Here, the clay is different, the stone is different, the cold is sharper and drier. Why not just build it the American way and survive? You don't have to prove anything." Chen responded quietly. "I'm not proving anything. I'm using physics that works anywhere stone can hold heat and fire can warm it. The shape might be Chinese. The principle is universal. The whole town thinks you're being foolish. The whole town burns 10 cords of wood per winter and freezes every morning. Maybe they're the foolish ones." Wang left shaking his head. By November, when the first serious cold arrived, Chun Wei's cabin had become a cautionary tale told before it even had a chance to fail. Parents used it to teach children about the danger of arrogance. That's what happens when you think you know better than everyone else. Builders used it to reinforce proven methods. There's a reason we build the way we build. It's not ignorance, it's survival. And Samuel Hutchkins, genuinely worried now that winter was arriving, made one final attempt. He rode out to Chen's claim in mid-November, knocked on the door, and spoke with the blunt honesty of a man trying to prevent tragedy. "It's not too late to dismantle that thing and build a proper fireplace. I'll help you do it. No cost, no judgment. I just don't want to find your family dead come spring." Chen thanked him for his concern. Hutchins rode away convinced he'd see a tragedy before the thaw. The town waited. And winter, indifferent to opinion and engineering debates alike, arrived right on schedule. January 1884 arrived like a punishment. On January 9th, a polar vortex descended from the Arctic and locked itself over Montana territory with the weight of something that had no intention of leaving. The temperature plunged to 28 below on the 10th, 31 below on the 11th. By January 14th, the thermometer outside the Silver Creek Community Hall read negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and it stayed there for 18 consecutive days. The sky was that hard, crystalline blue that means brutal cold. Air so dry it burned the inside of your nose, so cold that spit froze before it hit the ground. The kind of cold where metal became dangerous to touch, where leather cracked, where every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. And it didn't break. Day after day, the cold held. Silver Creek had seen bad winters before. Everyone had stories, but this was different. This was sustained. This was relentless. This was the kind of weather that found every weakness in every cabin, every gap in every wall, every flaw in every heating system. The community struggled. Families who thought they'd cut enough firewood in autumn were burning through their winter supply in 10 days, maybe 12. The mathematics were brutal. To keep a standard cabin above freezing overnight, you needed to feed the fireplace every 2 to 3 hours. That meant someone staying awake all night, or accepting that temperatures would crash to 20, 25 degrees by dawn despite the fire you'd built at bedtime. Most families chose rotation. Father takes the shift until midnight, mother until 3, oldest child until dawn. Exhaustion became normal. Frostbite became common. Robert Finch's family pushed their beds within 3 feet of the fireplace and still woke shivering. Margaret Connolly's store became an impromptu warming station where people who'd run out of firewood came to thaw during business hours. The Pritchard cabin, Daniel's pride, well-built and tightly chinked, couldn't maintain 50 degrees overnight despite burning pine a rate that would deplete his woodpile by February. Inside these cabins, families fought physics they couldn't see. Heat rises. Heat radiates outward from a point source and dissipates. Wooden walls and earthen floors leak warmth into the frozen ground and frozen air. A fireplace, for all its romantic appeal, is fundamentally inefficient. 70% of the fire's energy goes straight up the chimney as hot exhaust wasted into the night sky. By January 20th, people were desperate. Wood suppliers couldn't keep up with demand. Families were burning furniture, fence posts, anything combustible. Children and elderly were showing signs of prolonged cold exposure. The kind that doesn't kill immediately but weakens slowly, that leads to illness, to pneumonia, to quiet deaths in February or March that get attributed to winter sickness, but are really just the delayed consequences of freezing, day after day, night after night. Dr. Milton Ashford, who served the scattered homesteads within a day's ride of Silver Creek, made his rounds and saw the pattern. Chilblains, frostbitten fingers and toes, respiratory infections, the gray exhaustion of people who hadn't slept warm in weeks. And then he visited the Way cabin. He came on January 22nd, the 18th consecutive day below 35, because Jean had sent word through a neighbor that young May had a fever. Ashford expected the worst. Pneumonia, maybe worse, the kind of illness that thrived in freezing cabins where children huddled under blankets and breathed cold air all night. He knocked. Chen answered, and when the door opened, warm air rolled out into the frozen afternoon. Ashford stepped inside and stopped. The cabin was comfortable, not just survivable or tolerable, actually comfortable. Warm in a way that made no sense given the thermometer outside read -32. May was sick, yes, childhood fever, probably viral. Nothing catastrophic, but she was lying on the raised platform wearing light clothing, not buried under quilts. Jean was moving around the cabin in a simple cotton dress. Little Beau was playing on the floor near the platform's edge, barefoot. The fireplace held a small fire, barely going, more coals than flame. Ow! Ashford began, then stopped himself. He'd heard about the heated platform. He'd heard Hutchkins call it dangerous and wasteful. He'd assumed, like everyone else, that it was misguided at best, lethal at worst. But this cabin was warmer than his own house. Stay with me, because what happened next humiliated every expert in Silver Creek and forced them to confront a simple truth. Sometimes what looks primitive is just practical wisdom you haven't earned yet. Ashford set down his medical bag and pulled out a thermometer, not for the child, but for the cabin itself. He needed to know if what he was feeling was real or some kind of perceptual trick from coming out of the extreme cold. He placed the thermometer on a shelf away from the fireplace and waited. 3 minutes, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. At 3 in the afternoon, with a dying fire, in a cabin where outside it was 32 below zero. "Mr. Way," Ashford said slowly, "I need to understand what you've built here." Dr. Milton Ashford wasn't an engineer. He was a physician trained at Philadelphia Medical College, practical and evidence-based, someone who trusted observation over theory. And what he was observing in Chun Wei's cabin defied everything Silver Creek believed about heating in Montana winter. He checked the thermometer again. Still 68 degrees. Outside, -32. Inside, comfortable enough to wear light clothing. The fire in a firebox was barely alive. A bed of coals with maybe 3 small splits of pine resting on top, radiating gentle heat, but nothing like the roaring fires Ashford had seen in every other cabin during this cold snap. "When did you last add wood?" Ashford asked. Chen glanced at the window, estimating time by the angle of afternoon light. "Maybe 2 hours ago. I'll add more around sunset. That's usually enough until morning." "Until morning," Ashford repeated. "You're saying this cabin stays warm overnight with a single loading?" "The platform holds the heat," Chen explained, gesturing to the raised sleeping surface where May rested. "The stone absorbs energy from the exhaust gases as they travel through the internal flues. Then it radiates that heat back into the room for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours, depending on how hard I run the fire initially." Ashford placed his hand on the platform's surface near where the child lay. Warm, noticeably warm, like sun-heated stone in summer, but not uncomfortably hot. He moved his hand to a section farther from the firebox. Still warm. He walked to the far end, nearly 10 feet from the heat source. Warm. The entire 8 by 10-foot sleeping surface was maintaining consistent temperature. "Mr. Way," Ashford said carefully, "I need to document this. May I come back tomorrow morning? Early, before you rebuild the fire?" Chen nodded. "Come at dawn if you want. You'll see." Ashford returned at 5:47 a.m. on January 23rd. Outside temperature, -34 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun wouldn't rise for another hour. This was the coldest part of the 24-hour cycle, the point when every cabin in Silver Creek was at its most vulnerable. He knocked quietly. Chen answered immediately, fully dressed, calm. Inside the cabin, Ashford could see the firebox held nothing but gray ash and a few pieces of charcoal. The fire had died completely, probably around midnight based on what remained. 5 hours of no active combustion. Ashford pulled out his thermometer and placed it in 3 locations: near the sleeping platform, in the center of the room, and near the door. He waited 5 minutes at each position. The readings: near the platform, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Center of room, 56 degrees. Near the door, coldest spot, 52 degrees. The fire was dead. The outside temperature was 34 below zero, and the cabin's interior was still above 50 degrees everywhere, nearly 60 near where the family slept. Ashford had visited the Pritchard cabin 2 days earlier at dawn. Fire dead for 3 hours. Interior temperature, 28 degrees. Daniel Pritchard and his wife huddled under 4 blankets, their breath visible, ice forming on the inside of the window glass. The contrast was impossible to ignore. "How much wood are you burning?" Ashford asked. Chen walked him to the woodpile outside, a carefully stacked cord and a half, maybe slightly more. "I started with 4 cords in November," Chen said. "This is what remains. We're 8 weeks into winter." Ashford did the mathematics in his head. For cords minus roughly 1.5 cords remaining, Chen had consumed approximately 2.5 cords in 8 weeks. At that rate, he'd use maybe 3.25 cords for the entire winter, November through March, 5 months total. Every other family in Silver Creek was burning 8 to 10 cords for the same period. Some more. Chen Wei was using 1/3 the firewood and maintaining better temperatures with more consistent comfort. The doctor asked permission to take detailed measurements over the next week. Chen agreed. What followed was the closest thing to a controlled study Silver Creek would ever see. Ashford visited at dawn, midday, and evening. He recorded temperatures, fire status, wood consumption, and family comfort level. He asked Chen to maintain his normal heating routine. No changes, no optimization for observation. The data told a story that couldn't be dismissed. Temperature stability. Chen's cabin maintained a daily temperature range of 52 degrees, dawn, dead fire, to 70 degrees, evening, active fire. Average overnight drop, 12 degrees. Standard cabins in similar conditions showed ranges of 25 degrees, dawn, dead fire, to 75 degrees, evening, peak fire. Average overnight drop, 45 to 50 degrees. Heat duration. Single fire loading in Chen system, 8 to 12 hours of useful warmth. Single fire loading in standard fireplace, 2 to 4 hours before requiring new wood. Wood consumption, verified by Ashford over 7-day period Chen's daily average. Approximately 5 splits of pine, equivalent to roughly 1/8 cord per week. Standard cabin average, based on Ashford's visits to 12 other households, 3/8 to 1/2 cord per week. Comfort metrics. Chen's family slept on the platform surface itself, under light blankets and night clothes. Standard cabin families slept as close to the fireplace as safely possible, under multiple heavy quilts, often wearing day clothes plus additional layers. Chen's family reported uninterrupted sleep. Standard cabin families reported waking every few hours to tend fire or endure cold. The most dramatic measurement came during the night of January 26th to 27th, when temperatures outside plunged to -38 degrees, the coldest night of the entire winter. Ashford convinced Chen to let him stay in the cabin overnight with his thermometer and pocket watch, documenting the thermal performance hour by hour. Chen built up the fire at 8 p.m., larger than normal, more splits, hotter initial burn. By 9:30 p.m., the platform surface measured 97 degrees. Comfortable to touch, too warm to rest your hand on for more than a few seconds, but not burning. The family went to sleep at 10 p.m. Ashford's hourly measurements. 10 p.m. Interior temp. 69 degrees Fahrenheit, platform surface. 96 degrees Fahrenheit, fire. Active 11 p.m. Interior temp. 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Coals with flame midnight. Interior temp. 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Deep coals. No flame 1 a.m. Interior temp. 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 89 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Dying coals 2 a.m. Interior temp. 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Ash and ember 3 a.m. Interior temp. 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Effectively dead 4 a.m. Interior temp. 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Dead 5 a.m. Interior temp. 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Dead 6 a.m. Interior temp. 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Platform surface. 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire. Dead outside. During this same period, the temperature held steady at negative 38 degrees. A 70-degree differential between inside and outside at dawn, with no active fire for 3 hours. The platform had released stored thermal energy slowly, consistently, keeping the family comfortable all night. The children never woke. Jean never shivered. Chin slept soundly. Ashford visited 3 standard cabins that same night for comparison. The Finch cabin at 6 a.m., 22 degrees inside, fire dead for 90 minutes. The Brennan cabin at 6:15 a.m., 19 degrees inside, fire dead for 2 hours. The Pritchard cabin at 6:30 a.m., 26 degrees inside, fire barely alive with Daniel feeding it desperately after waking at 5 a.m. freezing. When Ashford compiled his notes, the conclusion was undeniable. Chun Wei's heated platform system was maintaining interior temperatures 28 to 35 degrees warmer than standard cabins at the coldest point of the night, using 60 to 64% less firewood over the course of the winter. The numbers weren't theoretical. They weren't estimates. They were measured, documented, repeated over multiple days and nights. Ashford wrote his findings in clear medical language in his personal log, dated January 28, 1884. The Wei cabin heating system demonstrates superior thermal efficiency compared to standard Montana Territory fireplace design. The use of stone mass to capture and store exhaust heat, then radiate it over extended periods, results in 1. Reduced fuel consumption. 2. Improved temperature stability. 3. Elimination of dangerous overnight temperature drops. And 4. Significantly better occupant comfort and health outcomes. The system's performance during extreme cold conditions, below minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit sustained, exceeds conventional heating by measurable, substantial margins. Initial skepticism regarding structural safety and smoke management appears unfounded. The installation shows no signs of cracking, smoke backup, or thermal failure after 3 months of continuous winter use. He showed these notes to Samuel Hutchins on January 30th. Hutchins read them twice, put the journal down, looked out the window at Chen's cabin, visible across the frozen valley, and said 4 words that must have cost him something to speak. "I need to see it." Samuel Hutchins visited Chun Wei's cabin on the afternoon of February 2nd, 1884. He didn't announce himself. He didn't bring witnesses. He came alone, in the manner of a man who suspects he might need to apologize and would prefer to do it privately. Chun was outside splitting wood when Hutchins arrived. The older man dismounted, tied his horse, and stood for a moment looking at the cabin. Externally unremarkable, just logs and clay and a stone chimney, like dozens of others in the territory. "Mr. Wei," Hutchins said, "I'd like to see your heating system, if you'll allow it." Chin set down his axe. Of course. Inside, the cabin was warm despite a small, almost negligent fire. Hutchins recognized the feeling immediately. Not the blast furnace heat of a fireplace running hard, but a deeper, more encompassing warmth that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The platform dominated the space. Solid. Permanent. Exactly as Chun had built it despite every warning, every criticism, every prediction of failure. Hutchins knelt beside it, ran his hand along the mortared stone. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the surface. "Go ahead." Hutchins placed both palms flat on the sleeping platform. Warm, evenly warm. He moved to different sections, near the firebox, middle, far end. Consistent temperature throughout. "The fire's barely going," Hutchins observed. "I fed an hour ago. 3 splits. That'll last until evening." Hutchins walked to the firebox, examined the construction. Clean burn. Good draft. No smoke smell in the cabin. He looked at the chimney connection on the opposite wall, tracing the path the exhaust must travel. Horizontally through the platform's internal flues, absorbing in a thermal mass, then finally rising. Everything he'd said would fail was working exactly as Chun had designed it. Hutchins straightened, looked Chun in the eye. "I was wrong." Chun said nothing, waiting. "I told you this was dangerous. I told the whole town it would fail. I've built 200 chimneys in Montana territory, and I was certain I understood heat and stone and how they work together." Hutchins gestured at the platform. "I didn't, or I did, but only partially. I understood heat rising. I understood draft. I understood firebox design. But I didn't understand thermal storage. I didn't understand that you could make stone into a battery for heat." "The principle is old," Chun said quietly. 2,000 years in China. Longer in Korea. It's not new physics. Just new here. New to me," Hutchins admitted. "Dr. Ashford showed me his measurements. The temperature stability, the fuel savings, the overnight performance. I didn't want to believe it, but numbers don't lie." He paused. "This isn't stubbornness or foreign superstition. This is engineering I didn't know existed. Will you tell people that?" Hutchins nodded slowly. "I'll tell them I was ignorant. And I'll tell them this system works better than what we've been building." Word of Hutchins' reversal spread faster than his original criticism had. When a master mason admits he was wrong, publicly, clearly, without hedging, people listen. By late February, 3 homesteaders had approached Chun asking for details. How thick should the platform be? What kind of stone works best? How do you calculate the flue pathway? What's the correct clay mixture? Chun answered every question. He sketched designs in the dirt. He explained thermal mass, heat storage, radiant warming, convection patterns. He shared the clay formula he'd developed. 3 parts local clay, 2 parts coarse sand, 1 part fine ash from hardwood fires, mixed with just enough water to achieve mortar consistency. He didn't charge for the information. He didn't claim ownership. He treated it as practical knowledge that anyone could use. The first copycat system was built by Robert Finch in March 1884. Not identical to Chun's design, but adapted. Finch built a smaller platform, 6 by 8 feet instead of 8 by 10, using flat creek stones and Hutchins' masonry expertise. The flue pathway was simpler, with only 2 bends instead of Chun's serpentine design, but the principle was the same. Capture exhaust heat in thermal mass, radiated slowly. Finch's cabin the following winter. Fuel consumption dropped from 9 cords to 4.5. Not quite Chun's efficiency, but dramatic enough that everyone noticed. By winter 1885, 23 households within 3 counties had incorporated some version of heated sleeping platforms or thermal mass heating into their cabins. Some built full platforms like Chun's. Others built heated benches along walls. A few integrated stone heat storage into existing fireplaces, adding mass around and behind the firebox. The designs varied. The materials varied. The exact configurations varied based on cabin size, family needs, available stone, and builder skill. But the principle, the core insight that Chun had brought from Shandong province to Montana territory, became standard practice. Don't waste heat up the chimney when you can store it in mass and release it slowly. The cultural resistance melted faster than anyone expected. What had been dismissed as Chinese methods became that heated platform design, and then just the platform, and finally, by 1886, simply how you build a cabin if you're smart. The system even acquired local nicknames. Some called it the bed stove. Others called it the stone heater. A few old-timers who'd opposed it initially and then adopted it sheepishly called it the Hutchins platform, giving credit to the mason who'd helped perfect the American adaptations, even though Hutchins himself always corrected them. it's Chun Wei's design. I just learned from him. Daniel Pritchard, who'd once said a real man doesn't hide from winter under heated rocks, built a platform in his cabin in fall 1885. He never publicly apologized for his earlier comments, but when asked about his heating system, he'd say, "Turns out there's a difference between facing winter and being stupid about it." Dr. Ashford wrote a letter to the Montana Medical Journal in 1886 describing the health benefits he'd observed in families using thermal mass heating versus standard fireplaces. Lower rates of respiratory infection, fewer cases of frostbite and chilblains, better sleep quality, reduced winter mortality among children and elderly. The journal published it with skeptical editorial notes, but Ashford didn't care. He'd seen the data. He'd measured the temperatures. He knew it worked. By 1890, the heated platform wasn't universal in Montana, but it wasn't unusual either. It had entered the regional building vernacular, one option among many, respected and understood, no longer foreign or controversial. Chun Wei never became famous. He didn't patent the design or profit from its spread. He just homesteaded his claim, raised his children, and occasionally helped neighbors with the technical details when they came asking. But here's what's remarkable. The same principle Chun built in 1883, thermal mass heat storage using stone to capture and radiate exhaust energy, is now being rediscovered by modern sustainable building advocates. They call them masonry heaters or rocket mass heaters. They're marketed as cutting-edge green technology. High-end versions sell for $8,000 to $15,000 installed. And they work on exactly the same physics Chun Wei used in Silver Creek, Montana Territory, when everyone told him he was building a death trap. The truth is this. What looks primitive to the arrogant is often just practical wisdom they haven't earned yet. Chun understood something fundamental that American builders in 1883 have forgotten or never learned. Heat isn't just warmth, it's energy that can be stored, moved, and released over time if you build the right structure to hold it. Stone remembers heat. Fire is temporary. But warm stone radiates comfort for hours after the flames die. That's not superstition. That's not cultural quirk. That's physics that works in Shandong Province and Montana Territory and anywhere else human beings need to stay warm through a cold night. Samuel Hutchkins understood this by February 1884. The town of Silver Creek understood it by 1886. Modern sustainable builders are understanding it now, more than a century later, selling the same solution as innovation. Chun Wei understood it from the beginning. He just had to survive the winter that proved him right. On a frozen January night in 1884, while most of Silver Creek, Montana Territory fought to stay alive at negative 38 degrees, Chun Wei's family slept comfortably on a warm stone platform, using a fraction of the firewood their neighbors burned. They didn't sleep warm because Chun was lucky. They slept warm because Chun understood thermal mass, radiant heat, and the simple fact that captured energy beats wasted energy every single time. The Chinese bed stove that everyone mocked became the heating system everyone copied. Not because of marketing, not because of persuasion, but because when your children are freezing and your firewood is running out and someone nearby is warm and safe using half the fuel, mockery turns to migration pretty fast. The lesson isn't just about heating systems. It's about humility in the face of unfamiliar knowledge. When someone builds something different, something from another culture, another tradition, another way of thinking about the same problem, maybe ask questions before you decide it's wrong. Maybe measure results before you declare failure. Maybe recognize that different doesn't mean inferior. It just means you haven't learned it yet. Chun Wei didn't invent thermal mass heating. He brought 2,000-year-old engineering to people who desperately needed it and were too proud to admit it until winter forced their hand. That platform saved his family. Then it saved 23 other families. Then it became part of how Montana built itself, quietly, without fanfare, just practical people recognizing practical solutions when the proof was literally measurable in degrees and cords of wood. Today, if you visit museums of frontier life or historical reconstructions of Montana Territory homesteads, you might see cabins with raised stone platforms and serpentine flue systems. The plaques usually call them thermal mass heaters or early sustainable design. They rarely mention Chun Wei. But somewhere in Silver Creek, if the town still exists, if anyone remembers, there might be an old cabin foundation with river stones mortared in a particular pattern, a chimney on the wrong wall, a platform that once kept a family warm when everyone said it couldn't be done. And if you know what you're looking at, you're seeing the moment mockery turn to migration. The moment one man's joke became everyone's survival strategy. The winter of 1884 proved something simple and profound. The best technology isn't always the newest. Sometimes it's the oldest, just waiting for people humble enough to learn it. Now it's your turn. Which part of this solution would you use in your home today? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know what winter means where you live. What's the coldest you've ever faced? Did your heating system keep you comfortable, or did you wake up freezing? And if this story made you think differently about old knowledge and modern arrogance, hit that subscribe button. Every week, I bring you one real frontier technique that worked when survival actually depended on it. Techniques that modern science is only now validating. Share this with someone who loves history, engineering, or just really hates being cold. Shen Wei's solution deserves to be remembered. Thanks for watching. Stay warm out there. Educational note. This video presents historically inspired reconstructions for educational and storytelling purposes. Characters, names, and specific events are fictional, while the techniques, concepts, and principles discussed are based on real historical practices and well-established physical or practical knowledge. Any modern application should be evaluated according to current standards, safety guidelines, and applicable laws or regulations. This content is educational in nature and does not constitute professional, technical, or legal advice.